Hello. Excuse my voice. I'm a little bit sick. But yeah, I'm on my lunch break at work, and I've been trying to write a letterbox review for. I saw it on Saturday night, so 4 days now. It's Wednesday. The new Lord of the Rings movie, The War of the Rohirrim, the new prequel, and I just couldn't put into articulate words exactly what I was feeling about the movie. So I figured, hey, I feel like I can probably get the points out more effectively and better if I just record it and kind of just ramble. And so if you want to hear my rambling thoughts on Lord of the Rings movie, stick around. But if you don't care about that, I mean, why would you click on this video? So anyway, The Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim. It is an anime prequel to the main series, set about 200 years before, I think. And it focuses on the Kingdom of Rohan, which plays a pivotal role if you've seen the original trilogy and the events of the Lord of the Rings. Now, if you didn't watch my videos that I released a few months back, I essentially rewatched the Lord of the Rings trilogy, this time the extended versions, for the first time. I'd never seen the extended version, but this was my first time rewatching it probably since childhood, and I always had a fondness for Lord of the Rings. I've always been a fan. But I would say I'm always been at the level of being a very casual fan. It's a franchise I've always liked and admired and felt comfort in, but it's not something like the big franchises I love, like A Song of Ice and Fire or One Piece, where I just wholeheartedly dedicate myself to knowing all of the characters and lore and history and consuming all of the expanded material. It's just, I know a lot of people are like that with Tolkien, but it's just something that never really drove me or stuck out to me, and I never really took the time to do that dive. So I am basically just a fan of that original trilogy of movies. I've read the Hobbit book, and I love the Hobbit book. I've never been able to get through Fellowship of the Ring, the novel. It is an incredible story, Fellowship, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and I think it's paved the way for fantasy storytelling as we know it in its modern iteration, so it's incredible for that. But the book itself, I'm going to be incredibly hot take and probably be torn apart here. It is not a very good book. It is incredibly rambly, it goes off on these weird tangents about things constantly. There's no consistent point of view. It's very jumps around. It is kind of a mess, and it is revolutionary and incredible story for the time, especially when it came out. But even the Hobbit novel was much more clean and consistent in my opinion. But which I love that book, so I have not been able to get through Fellowship. Anyway, that's my background for my fandom level of Lord of the Rings, if you haven't seen those videos. But essentially I rewatched the movie trilogy early a few months back with Zach, who had never seen any of them, period. So we watched the extended editions. I don't know if that's the best first engagement with the series, but yeah, they're still great. I still love them. Here's the thing though, they're not favorites, I would say. I love them and I appreciate what they do, but I don't have that that next level of connection that makes something a favorite for me. So it's something I'm a fan of. It's something I've talked about a lot on this channel, but it's not really a favorite series of mine. Anyway, diving into War of the Rohirrim, I feel like the biggest... I enjoyed this movie. I thought it was good. I wouldn't say it was amazing, like the original trilogy was. I wouldn't say it's at the level of the first Hobbit movie, which I loved. Hot take, the Hobbit trilogy, the first movie is great. Sorry, if you can't admit that. But the first Hobbit movie is great. The second one is pretty rough, and then the third one is abysmal. So that's my take on the Hobbit trilogy there. But I would say it sits between the second and first Hobbit movie, but way closer to the first, I would say, in terms of my ranking of this franchise. It is good. It's not amazing. I think the biggest issue with this movie, though, is there's an element of Lord of the Rings and the stories in, I guess, Tolkien, the Tolkien verse that is missing from this movie. I think what makes Tolkien stories like this work so well, and this is coming from someone who is not a huge Tolkien fan or expert or anything, I think what makes these stories work so well is that at the same time as these grand, like, nobility, royalty war conflicts are happening, there are, both literally and figuratively, little people going on a little adventure. But you know what I mean, like going on an adventure, on the ground, fun adventure. And I think The Hobbit has that. The Lord of the Rings trilogy has that, and without that duality, it just feels like there's a part that's missing. It isn't really Lord of the Rings anymore. It like, without that little on the ground adventure that's happening at the same time as these big political moves. And essentially, Zach put it very well when we were leaving the movie. It chose to focus entirely on the most boring part of Lord of the Rings, which is the kingdom shit and the, war preparing shit. And it was still good, but it was dry. There's no other way around it. It was definitely dry, and I think that's the driest part of Lord of the Rings for me. To me, when I'm watching Lord of the Rings, I like all of it, but I feel like I definitely prefer, like, cutting back to what are Frodo and Sam up to, what is the on-the-ground adventure going to. Before the split off, of course, at the end of Fellowship, they were all together, but you know what I mean. You know exactly what I mean, if you've seen them. There was no real of that, like, on-the-ground emotional core here. It was more just the royalty and kingdom shit from Lord of the Rings, and that was the entire movie. It was still good. It was a good execution of that, but if I want royalty and politicking and, feuding kingdoms-esque stories, I'm obviously going to go to A Song of Ice and Fire, which is my favorite, probably my favorite series of all time. So like, like Song of Ice and Fire just takes that concept and gives it so much more depth and some of the best characters ever written and some of the best storytelling ever written. And this does not have that. I don't know. To be quite honest, I have no idea if this is based on something Tolkien wrote or if this is an original piece. I would have to imagine it's like based on some sort of like appendices stuff or Silmarillion stuff. I don't know for sure. Comment below if you can correct that. If you know. Because I'd be curious to know as well. But yeah, it just didn't really have that, on the ground core for me. And for being entirely a royalty kingdom politicking movie, it just felt incredibly dry and didn't have that character depth that series like A Song of Ice and Fire have. So it's kind of like the worst of both worlds, I think that part of Lord of the Rings is much more engaging and tolerable because it's meshed in with an on-the-ground fun adventure, And without that element, it just doesn't stand on its own that too well. And all is to say, this is a good movie, don't get me wrong, but yeah, there was dryness to it, and it was much too simple for the type of story it was trying to tell. Guy is bad and wants power, revenge, because his dad got killed, but he loved these people up until that point. Like, it was really just very simplistic, and I had an idea for the movie that I thought the movie was going to take, and it did not take that route. So early and this is going to have some spoilers, so if you care about spoilers, I would say probably turn off here, but if you don't care. Early in the movie, our princess main lead, I think her name's Hera, she gets kidnapped and taken to the sort of fortress of the villain, which is revealed to be Isengard, which in the original trilogy is the like palace of Saruman. And we even see Saruman at the end of the movie, so we know he's around and active at this time. So what I thought they were going to do was that he was being brainwashed and eaten away at, the villain in this, Wolf I think is his name, spelled W-U-L-F. He was being eaten away at brainwashed by Saruman, so Saruman could get power over Rohan and use it for his like practices and, you know, eventual allegiance to Sauron. I don't know if he was aligned with Sauron yet at this point. I'm not 100% sure. But that's where I thought it was leading, and I thought that would have been a very clever reason as to why the villain is acting the way they are, because they're not fully in control of their own actions. But it didn't go that route. It didn't do that. I thought that would be a much better, stronger story. And speaking of, the allusions and references to the events of the original trilogy are very... I don't know, they felt shoehorned in and mandated almost, and they were so explicit. Like, obviously, this story is the, you know, the origin story of Helm's Deep. And it's why it has such the reputation that it does. And it was nice to have, like, this sort of story that sort of very much parallels the Battle of Helm's Deep and the Two Towers. Like, it's a very similar story. And I love historical parallels. Like, it's quote George Lucas, like poetry, it rhymes. So I did really like that element of it. But yeah, there's a part where she explicitly says, like the main character, this is why it's called, we're calling it Helm's Deep now, and this is why it's called that. And it's like, you would think that name came up over time of the story being passed down and told. You know, it didn't come down in the moment, the days after Helm sacrificed himself, you know? But, yeah. And then there's a part where she finds these random orcs on the top of the mountain where Helm's Deep is, and they're like collecting rings for some nefarious purpose, and you know. And at the end, she's like, "I got a letter from a wizard. He wants to inquire about the orcs I found that were collecting rings. I'm gonna go meet him." And it's like, how would he know? How would he know that there were orcs up there that were collecting rings and that she found them? Like, they weren't corresponding before. Like, I don't know. Anyway, that I thought they were going to do a subversion as well in that scene. Like, obviously you're thinking, oh, it's Gandalf. And it is Gandalf. But it would have been so clever if, like, they asked, oh, what's the name of this wizard? And it was like, oh, his name's Sauron. That would have been such a clever subversion, and it would have set up, like this, like, dread at the end. Like, oh my god, she's leaving to go on this adventure, but it's to meet Sauron, you know? That would have been better, I think. But they didn't take that route. They just went with the straightforward, oh, she's going to meet Gandalf route. And it, you know, it's obvious. And then Saruman shows up at the end and, like, pledges allegiance to the new king of Rohan. And it's like, here's the thing. Like, I think what they're doing here, there's been all these rumors about, and, like, I think it's officially announced, like, this new live-action Lord of the Rings movie with the original cast called The Hunt for Gollum. And it is a live-action movie that's going... Oh, God. Sorry, my car, it has this touchscreen. I talked about it in some videos before, where the touchscreen starts doing things... Not touchscreen, but, like, the screen starts doing things on its own. It's really frustrating. But anyway, so there's doing this movie called The Hunt for Gollum, which is going to take canon events that apparently happened before the first movie, in which Gandalf and Aragorn kind of teamed up and adventured to try to find Gollum and, you know, get information and collect information about Sauron's rise and the rings and everything before the original trilogy. And this is a canon story. I think it's part of Tolkien's lore. But it's really weird that they're just choosing to make a movie out of something that's clearly like probably a throwaway line, like, oh, this is what Gandalf and Aragorn, this is how they knew each other, and this is what they were up to, you know? But they're making this movie, and I'm 100% convinced that they're going for here is that they're going to make Hera from this movie, like, a part of their posse. Like, so it's like a trio, you know, instead of just two, you know? I think that's, like, you know, probably make a stronger movie to have that trio and fill out that group, even if they had more. So yeah, that's what I was, like, thinking they're setting up here. I think it's just sort of they're trying to, like, expand this universe. But it was, I will say, overall, to encapsulate, it was really cool that they made a prequel to a huge franchise, one of the biggest movie franchises, and they made a prequel movie to it in theaters, and it was a different medium. It was anime. I think that's amazing. I think that's really cool. The art style, I would say, was sometimes a little rough. Some of the faces look really good and hot, and then other people look really ugly. The animation wasn't the best, but the fact that it chose that medium and stuck with it was really bold and surprising. It opens up the possibility for other franchises, like, hey, Maybe we'll get an or an anime Star Wars movie in theaters. Maybe we'll get, like more animated Game of Thrones / Song of Ice and Fire content. It's exciting. It's exciting, and it opens the doors, and it's cool that they stuck with that and got a genuine anime filmmaker that I think worked on Ghost in the Shell and other movies that I'm not familiar with, but that is really cool. And the art style and animation could have been better, especially for a Lord of the Rings movie. You think they would get the top animators, but overall, it was a good movie, but I've plainly expressed my issues with it here, and I think this will serve as a place of writing out a letterbox review. So, yeah, thanks for watching.